You might be wondering how I ended up putting this iMac in the dishwasher at midnight while my wife and son were soundly asleep. Let's take a trip back to when another package arrived from the Goodwill auction site. Due to the shipping damage on my previously purchased Mac Pro, I wanted to make sure this one came out of the box okay. Initial looks at the packaging had me worried, but thankfully it all did look okay. Or so I thought. When I got it home, I took it out of the box and noticed something that I didn't catch earlier that day. The smell. This thing smelled like it smoked 2 packs a day. I imagine the previous owner was this guy. You might be wondering why I even bought this old Mac, and I kinda wonder that myself. You see, I have my 2010 Mac Pro that I use for video editing and have messed with creating a couple Hackintosh laptops, but I wanted to see what an iMac would be like. When I came across this one listed, I thought it was a 2011 model based on the model number that it had listed, but as I've learned, the model number is only part of the puzzle. It turned out it was a 2010 model which had a first-gen i3 processor, and upgrades available are not easy to come by. I decided to give it a chance. It was only $50, so I figured, why not? Now I wish I left the auction unpaid. Now back to the machine. I was slowly realizing how bad this computer was going to be to clean. I noticed there were these yellow stains all over the case, and taking a cleaning wipe to it turned it yellow with each swipe. This is seriously the nastiest computer I've ever tried to clean. As I realized how much work this was going to be to clean, I decided I needed to at least boot it up to make sure it worked. And sure enough, it came to life normally. Now that I knew I had at least a working machine, it was time to take a look inside. Somehow things were worse inside than outside. There was tar residue all over every surface inside of the computer. The top vent was completely yellow, and basically everything you touched had this nasty film. It was apparent that no amount of eucalyptus oil would clean this thing. The fans had this brownish dust stuck to the blades. This was basically the tar mixed with dust. My first course of action was to start removing components and figure out a way to clean them. At this point, I wasn't sure if any of this was worth it. Every minute spent around this computer was giving me a headache from the smoke smell. I decided to glove up for this part and started removing screws. With the board out, you can see the tar is even on the backside, and every surface turns the paper towel yellow. I kept taking it apart, going after the heat sinks next. These seem to be holding on to a lot of the smoke smell in the fins, so they would need to be cleaned really well. My first idea for cleaning the circuit boards was to use this electronic cleaner. It comes out with some pressure and dries pretty fast. I sprayed the boards and let the excess fall into this plastic lid. I wasn't sure at this point if it was doing anything, but it definitely gets rid of thermal paste in a flash. After spraying a bit, I went to straight rubbing alcohol and a toothbrush to loosen anything on the board. Here's a look at what came off of those boards. The more I get into this, the worse it gets. I left those to sit for a bit and focused on the rest of the computer. I wasn't sure how much I would need to take this apart yet, so I tried to get in there the best I could to see if I could get it clean. Even on surfaces that look okay, the paper towel would still come out yellow after rubbing it with some alcohol. The only thing that kept me going was the fact that this at least looked like it could be cleaned with some hard scrubbing. Now on the surface it looked like I had made some progress, but the smoke smell was everywhere still, hiding in every nook and cranny of this computer. Seeing it all laid out, I knew there was only one choice: to disassemble it as much as possible. Every wire and sensor I could remove, every piece of foam and tape, it all needed to come out. I took apart each of the fans to clean them. There was so much grime hiding in these, I considered just getting new ones. I then went to town, taking some pictures before I got too far to aid me in putting it back together, if I ever got that far. Before I knew it, I had an almost empty aluminum shell. There were only a couple things I couldn't figure out how to remove, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I mentioned all the tape and foam had to come out. The tar was stuck to all of this, and it was a major reason for the lingering smell. So I had everything apart. What could I possibly do to get all of this stuff clean? Well, you know those videos about putting your keyboard in the dishwasher? Yeah, I took it to another level. I hope I didn't make you too uncomfortable seeing bare PCBs put into soapy water and rinsed off. As long as everything's completely dry, it's fine. I went to town with a toothbrush and scrubbed these like I was the busboy at a high-end restaurant. The one thing I was not comfortable with cleaning was the power supply. and unfortunately it has a lot of tape on it to hold on to the smell. I may get a replacement later, but for now I'll just reuse it. As for the case, there was only one way to ensure it got as clean as possible. I left everything to dry in my garage for over a week, and when I came back to check, everything looked to be okay. There was a little bit of residue left over from all the metal tape and foam strips, so I used some acetone to remove the rest of that. I had removed all the metal tape that was in here for grounds, since everything seemed to absorb that smoke residue. I referenced my pictures and replaced the tape where necessary. I started adding the components back into the case and got it ready to mount onto the stand. I continued assembling the puzzle, hoping everything would work when it was all back together. I connected the screen, and now it was time to plug it in and hope that nothing would blow up. I reached for the power button and... it's alive. Not only am I surprised it's working at all, but this was the first try. Now it was time to get an OS installed. I had already imaged a High Sierra SSD on my other Mac, but this didn't want to load up and kept giving me errors. So I made a USB with Sierra on it, and it gave me errors. So I went even further back with El Capitan, and it looked like this was going to work until more errors. More than a little bit frustrated at this point, I didn't want to believe that these issues could possibly be related to the fact that I literally washed this in the sink. I went back as far as I could with a Snow Leopard DVD, but this too didn't want to work. It just got stuck at this Apple logo. Not knowing what to do, I swapped the RAM, formatted the SSD again, and tried one more time with my El Capitan USB. And wouldn't you know, it worked this time. I was able to then jump to High Sierra, and I had a working iMac. All that was left to do was to put the screws in for the screen and clean off the front glass. It didn't come out too bad, though there still is a faint smell of smoke due to the power supply still being the original, but it's way better than it was before. So after all that, what can I do with a 2010 iMac? Well, I started the good old Geekbench, which scored a 481 single core and 1035 multi-core. That isn't too good. I was curious as to how good the Wi-Fi card was in here, so I ran a couple speed tests. I was surprised when I got 105 megabytes down in the speedtest.net. I had to see what this GPU could do. I set my expectations low and was not disappointed. The high setting on Heaven couldn't break 10 FPS. So I turned it down to low and only got 15 to 20. Still not good. Being a 2010 model, I wanted to see what games from 2010 could even run on this. So I checked my Steam library, and I only had 2 games from 2010 that were Mac compatible. First, I ran Portal, and this had no issues. Being a Source game, I wasn't surprised. The only other game I had to try out from 2010 was Bioshock 2. Despite getting a warning at the beginning that this game was not optimized for this Mac, it ran better than I expected with the default settings, which were 720p and medium. It hovered around 30 FPS most of the time, with glimpses of 60 when the action died down or in certain areas. With some tweaking to the settings, this is more than playable. Since everyone else always uses it, I also tried CSGO. I had to turn it down to 720p and low settings to get it to even be playable in the range of 30 FPS. But I mean, who's going to use a 2010 Mac for gaming anyway? The last thing I wanted to test out was the Bruce X Final Cut Pro benchmark. This renders a 5K clip and you time it with a stopwatch to see how it did. Well, I first got a warning that editing high-res footage on this Mac was not recommended. Not a good sign. Then I tried the benchmark, and after about 4 minutes, it only had 4% done. So I'm going to call this a did not finish for this test. But despite all of these tests, the normal usability of this Mac was totally fine, fast even. With the SSD, it boots right up, and even with only 4 gigs of RAM, I never felt like it was being held back. Pages load fast, and everything feels pretty much like my Mac Pro, or any Hackintosh laptop I've done. Also, the screen still looks great. The colors are bright and vivid, and the 1080p resolution looks nice at this size. Had this thing not been kept in the basement of the Marlboro Ranch its whole life, it would have been a great deal for $50 for an everyday computer. It was quite a process cleaning this, and assembling it so long after taking it apart was pretty difficult. I only had a couple of leftover screws. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it at the moment. There are some upgrades I can do to the GPU and CPU if I track down the right parts, but I would have to drop around $200 to get those upgrades, so I'm not sure if that's the path I want to take right now. That's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Comment below if you've ever had to deal with any gross, dirty computers. Okay guys, until next time,